Greetings, everybody. This is Silver Thunder. We are coming back at you today as the extraordinarily ordinary gaming squirrel that I am, with some more Monster Hunter World. Today we are going to be hunting ourselves a silver Rathalos. I have actually just fought him for the first time yesterday, and boy howdy, he was a little bit of a doozy, but very enjoyable fight, at least as a ranged bow user. I can imagine melee being quite painful, especially if you don't have flash bombs, so fun times are ahead. You get to watch me take this guy down, get a little bit clumsy at first, but then I kind of settle back into my normal groove. And you might notice, I apologize for not uploading a third episode last week of Call of Duty. Life kind of got in the way, had some things going on with my kits that I had to take care of, and, just living that normal hashtag squirrel dad life. So, as I said, I want to try to be as consistent as I possibly can, but please refer to the very first video on this channel. I am not necessarily going to try to make too much of a commitment to uploading. I will just upload whenever I can. So, we're going to go ahead and just, without further ado, launch into today's topic du jour, as I'm liking to call it. And today, I have an interesting one. All of them are interesting, I should say. But this one is one that my wife and I think about a lot. Especially as we usually watch anime together every night, on the TV that I had acquired from a local human town. Gets great picture, by the way. But, and that is the topic of the psychology of fandoms. We are almost all of us part of a particular fandom, one way or another. And, I feel like that it's one of those things where it can be very destructive, it can be very beneficial. A lot of times it kind of tends to fall in between. But as with all things, I like to take a look at the past development of fandoms, or what a fandom actually is, or what it's defined as. And so whenever I think of fandoms, before we really start looking at what they look like in today and kind of dissecting their psychology per se, want to just consider what they were really in the past. And, fandoms, I think, can really be, if I was to give a working definition, and this is not Merriam-Webster definition, this is Silver Thunder definition, so take it as you will, but I would say a good working definition of a fandom is a group of people that are brought together by a similar hobby or interest. Usually tends to be on the nicher side of things, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. So with that, there are a lot of different things that can be considered fandoms. You have video game fandoms. Obviously, it's very big today. You have show fandoms. You have heck, even board game fandoms. You have TV show fandoms, sports. The list can go on and on. Whenever you get people together, people and squirrels, I mean by people, you can really have some bonding, for lack of a better word, over a mutually shared interest. And especially with things that require a good bit of commitment from their members. Say, case in point, Monster Hunter is a game that kind of asks a lot of its players, especially if you were a fan of the old school Monster Hunter entries. They really require a lot of the players. There's a good bit of commonality in that. And I think you really see original, fandoms that are really in pop culture, I guess you could say, really starting to come about as their own thing with the development of Trekkies, original D&D fans. And what's interesting to think about those is that those fandoms really had a bar for entry in order to be part of them. And in fact, a lot of it's associated with negative social connotations. You kind of have to be a bit of a recluse per se in order to be part of a fandom back in those days. But they did require a significant amount of investment, for the instance of Trekkies, love Star Trek myself. You really have to watch and invest in, the show that's been goes on, and that's also out of a lot of the interest of the general general audience, general people. It's more so applies to people who are quote unquote, let's just say, more nerdy or geeky. And hey, I say that as one of those people myself. And the same thing with Dungeons and Dragons, like you would have to, well, back then the mechanics of the game were much more complicated than, say, the 5th editions of today are. So required, you had to like buy, especially if you're wanting to run a game, you had to buy all the books and things like that, the modules to keep up with how to track things. There's a good significant level of investment with that. And I think because of the level of investment and because, the level of the relationships that would develop with that, especially, D&D games, I think, in particular focus here, they require a good amount of camaraderie in order for the daggone game to function. So that all being said, you really have like a tight-knit group forming in these proto-fandoms, as it were, at least in terms of like modern culture. And so, yeah, it's very interesting that you have like deep friendships and a good amount of commonality in these things, but also those kind of things can tend to be a little insular as well. The outsiders really aren't welcome. And I feel like that is something that has kind of evolved and catalyzed into a lot of fandoms that we have today, where, we're going to take the modern day example that I really have in going mind, and kind of what inspired me to talk about this topic in general is anime fandoms are very interesting all across the board, because it's not just anime itself as a broad category, just as much as, with Star Trek, it's not sci-fi shows in and of themselves. It was sci-fi, but there are different fandoms for each anime. If anybody who's been on the internet would be able to see that kind of thing in a moment. But it's interesting because you have a different spectrum of people who, some are gatekeepers, kind of like keeping that original, no posers allowed kind of thing. You really need to you're either really dedicated to this particular anime, or you're not really a true fan, things like that. And then you also have something that I really feel like that the internet has enabled is the complete removal, in most cases, of the bar for entry for most fandoms. Like, because of social media and things like that, you can really, these things like anime are much more accessible, and two, you can kind of just enter into a discourse or a Facebook group or a Discord server in general and, proclaim yourself that you are a part of the fandom without a whole lot of, true regulation, I guess I would say. It's not like that you would have to, have bought the DVDs of a particular anime in order to watch it, so to be part of the fandom. You can now pull it up on Netflix or Crunchyroll and things along those lines. My doggo is yelling in the background. She is very sad that the rest of my family has left the tree to attend to other squirrel business. So, how does a squirrel have a dog, you might ask? Well, that's for me to know and you to not find out, okay? Just to know that we got a dog, all right? But yeah, so it's interesting how the landscape has changed when it comes to fandoms and the kind of mentality that goes with them. Like I said, I feel like that there's a good split in the psychology of you have the gatekeepers and you have the people who may have more of a surface level commitment, kind of coexisting in a space that didn't really exist, 30, 40 years ago. And with that, I think there's a big polarity of reactions to things. Some fandoms are known as, toxic. A big talking one in anime is the My Hero Academia fan base, which, by the way, amazing show. I'm a huge fan of it. I highly recommend it. Don't let the fandom's behavior, trip you up or anything like that. Definitely watch the show. Fantastic story. Love it. Really, really good. But, they have a reputation for kind of being, toxic and, just unkind in general, making, frankly, nasty demands of, the mangaka and things like that. Similar to, Gachi Yakata, the quote-unquote fan base, half of them have, basically, essentially driven the mangaka off of the internet, which is bananas. So you have like that psychology where it can kind of turn, if you're not careful, that mutual interest that you're sharing with people can kind of turn into like a mob-like mentality, very, very quick. Once again, the aforementioned lack of regulation, I think, is a big part of that. So yeah, it's not necessarily a good landscape a big portion of the time, depending on like which fandom that you're looking at. There are elements of, and I say this with a little bit of trepidation. There are some toxic people in Monster Hunter. There's like some of the get good, you're a scrub of mentality. But I feel like that the Monster Hunter fandom and community largely is one that's dedicated to really helping out both each other, but also like newcomers as well. So, as with many things, there's a spectrum. And I don't want to necessarily make sweeping statements just to make sweeping statements, but certain fandoms are just known for more bad than good, and certain ones are known for more good than bad. So why is that? I wonder why fandoms at a psychological level, how can they go from this one extreme to another? Well, and I really think it just kind of boils down to just like, human behavior and human psyche, and also squirrels too. We can kind of well be nutty, as it were, over certain things. The best lake in the forest, the best place to gather assorted nuts and things like that. Heated debates in our own forums. But, so, as with anything, I always like to consider, what's the good that we can draw from these things, that we can extract, I guess, if you want to, for lack of a better term. And when it comes to the psychology of fandom, I think that the biggest boon that you have is the way that fandoms can really bring a lot of people who would normally be in disparate social circles together. Monster Hunter, for example, brings all sorts of different kinds of players. You have players like me who were initially brought in by the extremely cool creature designs because I'm a huge sucker for dragons and dinosaurs, and just putting me in a game where I am like pitted up against them with pretty compelling weapons is just a recipe for just chef's kiss. Absolutely love it. And, I tend to be on the more casual side of things, but it also brings the more extreme and challenge-seeking players, because especially, like, as you go back in the series, Monster Hunter is reputed for its, jank, but also difficulty as well. They were very merciless, especially in the older games. So, and you still have remnants of that challenge being preserved, usually in, like, in-game stuff in modern Monster Hunter games. So it's just interesting that it brings a broad spectrum of different players, and you could really see that by like the kinds of like YouTube personalities that are attracted to it. You have like the casual folks, the folks that are really more so into have like a good, chill, laid-back time, and then you also have like the hardcore speedrunners that are doing, frankly, amazing things with the game. And I feel like that is a fandom done more or less like correctly. Not perfectly, but correctly, I guess, is a way that you could look at it. Where you have all these different people who, there's going to be tiffs, people and squirrels are naturally conflict and sometimes evil driven creatures. And, there's going to be things that arise from that. But whenever you have them over the mutual love of something, eventually you'll just have a lot of that goodness kind of shine through in it. And I think that's just really, really cool. And similarly, like with My Hero Academia, or the Gacha Yakata controversy that happened recently, there are people who can be united over a common good of things. Once again, I apologize for my dog. But you can have people who are united over a common love and interest of something, and it could just really bring people together in a fantastic way that other things really could not. So, yeah, at the end of the day, honestly, when it comes to the good or bad of the psychology of a fandom, don't let things devolve into a mob mentality. Let people enjoy what they enjoy. I would say within reason. If there are bad things that are being enjoyed, then perhaps we should be asking different questions at that point. But when it comes to fandoms, accept also too that people are going to have different opinions than you, and just celebrate the thing that you're coming together for. Celebrate the love of the game or the love of the show or fill in the blank here. What unites you in your fandom, and just focus on that. And you might just help diffuse the seeds of tension that are out there and promote just one better fandom, but also just a better social space, whether it be in the internet or and just in life in general. That is what I got for you today when it comes to my rambling. So we'll just go ahead and let this hunt finish out. Brief note about playing Monster Hunter versus Call of Duty, by the way. From the metrics that I've been getting in my videos, it seems like that the Monster Hunter videos are definitely by far the more popular ones. So I will still have Call of Duty on the radar, and probably will be coming back to playing it. Once again, soundtrack of Howling Dog. My apologies. But, I want to go with what people are watching more, and people are definitely more invested and more interested, it seems, in my Monster Hunter content. So we're going to keep on rolling with that for the foreseeable future. Like I said, I might switch to a different series or a different Call of Duty. And, feel free to let me know about what you would like in the comments, That's the biggest way that I can tailor this content to what you guys want to see, is that if you let me know. So if you prefer Monster Hunter, let me know. If you prefer Call of Duty, let me know. And if you prefer something else, then yeah, I'll be glad to fire up and see what ideas you guys have. So feel free to throw that in the comments section below. Otherwise, I just want to thank you so much for tuning in and watching. And just being a great audience so far. It's been fun as a fledgling channel, just getting to, ramble about these topics that, I find interesting, and I really enjoy having the discussion about them. Well, that's going to put a wraps on the hunt today. Good old Mr. Silver Rathalos has been taken down. Wanted to capture him, but this hunt is tricky where he does not leave the area, so it can be difficult to know exactly whenever he is in capturable range if you don't have the appropriate skill to see that. I believe it's Capture Pro or Capture Master or something like that. But a fun hunt nonetheless. Once again, subscribe if you want to see more, and speaking of seeing more, I will see more of you guys in the next one. Take care, everybody. This has been Silver Thunder, and before I go, here's a shot of my build and my equipment, so that way you can see and duplicate it. Working towards a good elemental set, and that's kind of why I've been grinding Silver Rathalos lately. So yeah, that way you can get a view of the inner machinations of this build of I would say at least a semi-average bow user.